My friends, history has often been painted for us in soft strokes, as though the past were nothing more than quaint castles, armored knights, noble queens, and candlelit feasts. We have been told the stories of medieval times as though they were fairy tales. But fairy tales, as beautiful as they may sound, hide the cruel weight of truth. People imagine stepping into those times and living like kings and queens, but the truth is this: you would not last a single day in medieval times. We are cushioned by modern conveniences, by the luxuries of science, by the medicines that keep us alive, by the food that keeps us strong, and by the society that protects us from the harshest edges of survival. Strip all of that away and step into the Middle Ages, and you would quickly discover why life was short, why suffering was constant, and why history, if told in its raw form, is anything but boring. Imagine waking up not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the crow of roosters and the clang of church bells. Your bed would not be a soft mattress layered with cotton or foam, but a straw pallet that smells of mildew and damp earth. Rats would be your companions in the night, not pets or pests easily driven away with traps and sprays, but true vermin that carry fleas, fleas that could carry death. You would shiver under thin blankets in the cold winters, because there was no central heating. Your comfort would not matter, because in those days survival itself was the first and only concern. Think of food. Today you stroll into a supermarket with endless aisles of fruits, vegetables, meat, and packaged foods from around the world. In medieval times, your meals were dictated by the season, by what grew in the soil beneath your feet, and often by scarcity. A piece of bread, blackened and hard from poor flour, was a treasure. A hunk of cheese was a feast. Meat was rare, and when it was available, it was salted until almost inedible, just to keep it from rotting. Hunger was no stranger, famine was a frequent visitor. If a drought came, or if a storm destroyed the harvest, entire villages wasted away. And yet, this was life as ordinary. People did not question it because they knew nothing else. But you, spoiled by abundance, by snacks at midnight, by water that flows clean from a tap, how would you stand it? How would you survive the gnawing ache of hunger that does not leave you, day after day, season after season, and water something we take for granted? In medieval towns, water sources were filthy. Rivers were not only used for drinking but also as sewers. Human waste was tossed from windows onto the streets. Diseases bred in the filth, and epidemics swept through towns like a reaper's hand. The bubonic plague, the Black Death, wiped out nearly half of Europe's population. Imagine, half of the people you know, gone in the span of a few years. Doctors could do nothing. They wore grotesque bird-like masks stuffed with herbs, thinking that bad air carried sickness. Their remedies were not cures but tortures, bloodletting, leeches, concoctions of mercury and lead. In that world, a simple cut on your hand could mean death. A toothache could lead to infection that spread through your body. Childbirth claimed countless women's lives. Infants rarely survived beyond their first years. Yet we sit here today, wrapped in comfort, lulled by the idea that history is dull, that history is nothing but dates and names. But history is raw and bloody and terrifying. It is a mirror that tells us what life was before the comforts we enjoy. Would you used to antibiotics and painkillers survive when the only answer to infection was a prayer, and perhaps a priest to give you last rites? Let us walk through a medieval city together. The streets are narrow, crowded, and filled with filth. The smell hits you first: rot, waste, sweat, smoke. There are no garbage collectors. The refuse of daily life collects in the gutters. People push past you in heavy wool garments, their faces hardened by toil. Beggars line the corners, blind, crippled, diseased, begging for coins they will never receive. Children with hollow eyes clutch at scraps of bread. Thieves lurk in the shadows. Their punishment, if caught, not a slap on the wrist, but brutal justice. Hands cut off, ears sliced away, or hanging at the gallows in front of the crowd. Entertainment is not a movie or a concert. It is public execution, men and women tortured for the sins of crime, accused of witchcraft, or condemned for treason. The crowd cheers as the guilty scream. That was their theater. That was their joy. The castles you imagine as fairy tale fortresses were not cozy palaces but cold, drafty stone prisons. Lords and ladies lived with little warmth, always fearing betrayal, invasion, or death. To eat in a hall lit by torches, surrounded by armored guards, was not glamour, it was necessity. The walls were thick not for beauty but for survival. Enemies lurked everywhere. Wars were constant, villages were burned, crops stolen, people taken as slaves or forced into service. Peace was fleeting, safety was an illusion. And let us speak of the peasants, for most of you would not be kings or knights, but peasants tied to the land, bound in labor for a lord. You would toil from dawn until dusk, hands blistered, back bent, body worn before age had even gripped you. You would not have rights. Your body was property. Your life was not your own. And if war came, your home could be seized, your children taken, your life ended without a name in history to remember you. Consider hygiene. A bath was a rarity. Soap was scarce. People went weeks without washing. Diseases festered. Body odor was not shameful, it was ordinary. Lice and fleas were everywhere. You used to hot showers, clean clothes, perfumes, would find yourself scratching, itching, swarmed by vermin that could not be eliminated. And still, you dream of medieval romance, of knights in shining armor. Do you know how heavy that armor was? Up to 60 pounds strapped to your body, crushing you in heat, suffocating you in battle. Knights trained from childhood, not for honor alone but for survival in brutal combat. Swords were not elegant toys, but cleaving instruments of death. To fight in those times meant hacking into flesh, blood spurting, bones cracking. War was not glorious, it was mud, screams, and slaughter. And what of women? Their lives were dictated by men. A woman's worth was tied to marriage, to childbirth, to the will of her father or husband. There was no freedom, no choice, no voice. Many were married as children, bearing children before their bodies were ready, often dying in the process. And if a woman stepped out of line, she was branded a witch, persecuted, burned alive. So tell me, would you truly survive? Would you not collapse under the weight of such misery? Would you not long for the modern world with its comforts, its luxuries, its medicines, its mercy? We live in a time where poverty, though painful, is still far less brutal than the universal suffering of the past. We live in a time where knowledge flows freely, where light comes with the flick of a switch, where warmth comes with the turn of a dial, and yet we are bored, we yawn at history lessons. We call the past dull, but the past was anything but dull. It was a battlefield of survival. It was a test of endurance. It was a graveyard of dreams. Think of justice. Today we complain about long trials, about legal systems that take years to resolve. In medieval times, justice was swift and merciless. Trial by ordeal was common. You might be accused of theft, witchcraft, or heresy, and your fate would be decided by plunging your hand into boiling water or walking across hot iron. If your wounds healed, you were innocent. If they festered, you were guilty. Truth was not sought, punishment was delivered. Fear ruled, not fairness. Religion, too, was not always comfort. It was law. To defy the church was to risk your soul and your life. The church's word was unquestionable, its power absolute. You might believe, but belief came with chains. Superstition thrived. People feared demons, witches, curses, and omens. Every misfortune was seen as punishment from God or the work of the devil. Would you, with your scientific understanding, survive in such a climate, where reason itself was branded as heresy? Yet in all of this there is something that should stir us. The fact that they lived, that they endured, that despite hunger, despite plague, despite wars and cruelty, they carried on. They built cathedrals that still rise to the sky. They forged stories that still echo in our minds. They survived what we could not bear for a single day. Their strength was born of necessity. Their endurance was not a choice but the law of existence. And so I tell you, history is not boring. History is blood and bone, sweat and tears. History is the cry of the newborn who may not live to see another dawn. History is the clash of steel, the crack of fire, the weeping of mothers, the prayers of the dying. It is the story of humanity stripped bare. To call it boring is to confess that you have not truly seen it. To say you would survive it is to lie to yourself. For you are made of comfort, and they were made of fire. So the next time you look at history, the next time you scoff at the dull pages of a textbook, remember this: you would not last a day in their world. But those men and women of the past, they lasted a lifetime in a world that tried to crush them. And that is why we are here today. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine waking up in the middle of the night, not because of a phone buzzing or the hum of electricity, but because wolves are howling beyond the forest edge, and you fear that tomorrow you may not have food for your family. The wooden door creaks in the cold wind, and there is no lock strong enough to protect you from raiders, thieves, or even soldiers marching through your land. You lie there in the darkness, not with a sense of safety, but with a gnawing unease that every day could bring disaster. That was life in medieval times. Danger was not an interruption. It was the background of every breath. The rhythm of your existence was fear, hunger, toil, and fleeting moments of laughter, snatched between hardships. And if you think entertainment existed, picture this: there were no glowing screens, no libraries full of easy to read books, no streaming music to lift your mood. Instead, entertainment was raw and cruel: a bear chained and attacked by dogs, a man whipped in the square as the crowd jeered, a woman accused of sorcery dragged to a wooden stake, the fire licking her body as the town cheered or trembled. These spectacles were not seen as barbaric. They were daily diversions. Where you reach for a phone when you are bored, they reached for punishment and blood to feel alive. Would you endure such a world, or would you break at the sheer brutality of it? Even in the quiet countryside, life was no storybook. The fields you imagine as green and beautiful were fields of sweat and tears. A plow pulled not by machines but by oxen moved stubbornly through the soil. The farmer, shoulders hunched, blistered hands gripping rough wood, worked hour after hour, day after day, and when the harvest came, it was not guaranteed plenty. Sometimes blight destroyed the crops, sometimes storms flattened the fields, sometimes locusts swept in and left nothing but ruin. A whole year's labor could be erased in a single day. You think a bad Wi-Fi connection ruins your day. What would you do if everything your family depended on was gone overnight, and all you could do was watch them starve? And then there is war. Not the distant images you see on a screen, not the sanitized versions taught in classes, but war that walked into your town, trampled through your door, and took what it pleased. Men with swords and axes came not only to fight armies but to pillage homes. They set fire to barns, they carried off livestock, they killed fathers and enslaved children. War was not fought far away. It was in your backyard, it was in your bed, it was in your village. You could not hide behind a government or hope for peace treaties. War was chaos, and chaos visited often. Some dream of being knights, noble defenders of the realm, wrapped in shining armor. But think again. A knight's training began in childhood. As a boy, you would be torn from your home, sent to serve another lord, taught not kindness but endurance. You would sleep on the floor, run with heavy weights, ride until your body ached, learn to wield weapons that broke bones with every blow, and when you became a knight, your body was a scarred map of every battle. Armor crushed your shoulders, heat suffocated you, and in war, men screamed as they bled beside you. To kill was not noble, it was survival. To live meant to cut down another man, his face still human, his eyes still pleading. And when the battle was over, the field was littered with corpses, bloated and rotting, the stench lingering for weeks. And yet, knights were glorified because people needed heroes, even if those heroes were killers. The castles that decorate postcards today were not warm palaces but fortresses against constant threat. Within their walls, fear was daily bred. The lords and ladies were not free of worry. Betrayal lurked behind every smiling face. Poison slipped into goblets, daggers hid in the shadows, and power changed hands not by election but by bloodshed. You could be a king one day, a prisoner the next, your crown gone, your life dangling by a rope. You envy their jewels, their gowns, their feasts, but you forget their paranoia, their assassinations, their sudden downfalls. Would you survive the ceaseless game of survival that power demanded? Or would you crumble at the first whisper of treachery? And what of medicine? Think for a moment of the simplest illness you have endured, a fever, a headache, a sore throat. In medieval times, that could be death. There were no antibiotics, no hospitals filled with advanced equipment. A doctor might come with leeches to suck your blood, believing that illness was caused by imbalance of humors. They might bleed you until you were weak, forcing your body to fail rather than heal. They had no understanding of germs, no concept of bacteria, no tools to fight infection. Childbirth claimed countless mothers. Even the healthiest woman could die in a single night, leaving infants behind to starve. And infants themselves were fragile. Half of them never saw adulthood. You would cry out for help, but help would not come. Only prayers, herbs, and a crude hope that your body would somehow endure. Education was a privilege for the few. Most people could not read or write. Books were chained in monasteries, copied by hand, and guarded like treasures. Knowledge was a gate locked tightly, and if you reached for it without permission, you could be accused of heresy. Imagine being hungry for truth but silenced by fear, punished for asking questions, condemned for seeking answers. You live in a time where information pours into your hands from glowing screens, where curiosity is rewarded, where learning is endless. Back then, ignorance was the law, and knowledge was often a death sentence. And let us not forget the role of superstition. People lived in a world where spirits and curses seemed more real than science. If a storm destroyed crops, it was a punishment from heaven. If cattle died, a witch had cursed them. If someone fell ill, demons were blamed. Imagine living with that fear, where every shadow carried a spirit, every misfortune was a curse, and every question could cost you your life. The church was not just a place of worship, but a hand of power that shaped every law, every belief, every fear. And though faith gave comfort, it also chained hearts, demanding obedience, silencing dissent, and binding people in terror of damnation. Yet in the middle of this darkness, human beings still laughed, still sang, still told stories. Around fires, families huddled together, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, yet they clung to one another. They found joy in simple things: a loaf of bread, a shared song, a wedding feast. Life was brutal, but life still had sparks of beauty, and maybe that is the greatest lesson, that they endured what would break us. And they endured not only with survival but with resilience. So when you look back at history and feel boredom stirring in your chest, when you read the dates and think they are dust, remember that behind every date was a heartbeat. Behind every battle was blood spilled in the mud. Behind every famine was a child crying from hunger. Behind every plague was a mother weeping as her family vanished. History is not a dull record. It is the echo of human suffering, human endurance, human survival. And you, living in the comfort of this age, should tremble at the thought of stepping into their shoes, for you would not last a day where they lasted lifetimes. And now imagine winter, a medieval winter, not softened by central heating or insulated homes. The wind whistles through cracks in the wooden walls, frost bites your skin, and your breath forms clouds even indoors. Your fingers are numb, your body weak, and there is little food. You wrap yourself in whatever rags you can find, huddled close to the fire if you are fortunate enough to have wood to burn. But many had none. Many froze, huddled under thin blankets, praying for the thaw that might come months away. Children cried in the cold until their voices failed, and parents could do nothing but hold them. This was winter then, not a season for hot chocolate and holidays, but a season of survival. You would not last a day. That is not an insult. It is a truth. We are creatures of convenience, molded by a world that protects us. But the medieval world did not protect, it punished. The rain soaked you, the sun burned you, the wind cut through you, the earth starved you, and disease hunted you. And yet they lived. They built cathedrals that rose to the heavens, towers that still stand, stories that still live. They carved their survival into stone and memory. We call them backward, but they endured trials that would annihilate us. Think, too, of justice and punishment. In a society without prisons as we know them, punishment was public, immediate, and cruel. Thieves had hands cut off, liars had tongues ripped out. Traitors were hanged, drawn, and quartered in the square, their bodies displayed as warnings. The crowd gathered not in horror, but in fascination. These were lessons carved into flesh. Imagine walking past the city gate and seeing heads on spikes, rotting in the sun, reminders of defiance. That was not horror, it was order. You, used to quiet police sirens and courtrooms, would faint at the spectacle of justice as they knew it. And still, amidst this, humanity clung on. Mothers taught children to pray. Fathers taught sons to work the land. Lovers still whispered beneath the stars. Music still rose in taverns. People still dreamed. And that, perhaps, is the greatest miracle of history. Not that they suffered, but that they lived in spite of it all. That they carried on, built families, left legacies, and passed through the fire so that we might stand here today. Picture yourself walking into a medieval marketplace. At first, it seems alive with noise, merchants shouting, children running, animals braying. But look closer, and you see what lies beneath the surface. The air smells not of fresh fruit or roasted coffee, but of sweat, mud, manure, and fish beginning to rot. The ground is not paved, it is dirt churned into thick mud by endless feet and the hooves of animals. You step carefully, for one wrong move places your shoe in human waste thrown from a window above. Vendors do not sell polished goods wrapped neatly in packages. They sell what little they can. Onions tied together with rope, chunks of meat buzzing with flies, rough cloth that will scratch your skin. Coins change hands. But barter is common, a chicken traded for a sack of grain, labor exchanged for a small jug of ale. You would be shocked at how little money could buy, and even more shocked at how little there was to buy at all. And while you stand in that marketplace, you hear the sound of a drum, a crowd gathering, a spectacle about to unfold, not a play, not music, not a dance, an execution. A man is dragged through the mud, his face beaten, his body bound. He has been accused of theft, or heresy, or perhaps of witchcraft. There is no trial by jury, no defense, no appeal. The sentence is already decided. The crowd presses in, children sitting on their fathers' shoulders to see better. You feel a chill when you realize this is their entertainment, their excitement. A rope is placed around his neck, or flames are built high, or perhaps the wheel awaits him. He screams, and the crowd cheers. You close your eyes, but there is no escape from the sound of agony. When it ends, the crowd disperses as though nothing happened, returning to buy bread, to fetch water, to laugh and gossip. Death was not extraordinary, it was woven into daily life. Imagine living in a house made not of stone or brick, but of wattle and daub, sticks and mud pressed together, thatched roof above, smoke curling through the air because there is no chimney. The fire burns in the middle of the floor, the smoke stinging your eyes, blackening your walls. The floor is dirt, sometimes strewn with straw to soften it, but always damp, always filled with crawling insects. You share this space not only with your family but often with animals, for goats or chickens are brought inside to keep them from thieves. Privacy does not exist. You sleep side by side, all in one room, the stench of sweat and animals filling the air. And when the rain comes, water leaks through the roof, dripping into the food, soaking the bedding, chilling the children. Now walk with me into the life of a peasant. You wake before dawn, the rooster crowing, your body already aching from the work of yesterday. You have no clock, only the rhythm of the sun, and so you rise when the light begins to glow faintly in the east. There is no breakfast waiting, no hot coffee to sharpen your mind. Perhaps a crust of bread left from the night before, dipped in weak ale because water is unsafe to drink. You gather your tools, rough and heavy, and you step out into the fields. The soil is stubborn, the weeds fierce, the sun merciless. You bend your back, again and again, until sweat soaks your clothes. You work not for yourself but for your Lord, for much of what you grow is not yours to keep. Your children work beside you, small hands raw, faces sunburned, no toys to play with, no schooling to attend. This is their childhood labor and survival. If you fall ill, there is no rest. The Lord does not pause your duties because you are weak. The fields still demand work, the animals still need care, the taxes still need paying. You drag yourself out, fever burning, cough tearing at your lungs, and you work because to stop is to starve, and if you collapse, your family suffers. This is why life expectancy was short, not because people did not value life, but because life valued nothing. Death claimed the weak, and sometimes the strong, without mercy. And then there are the seasons. Summer brings endless toil, sweat dripping, skin burned, exhaustion that never leaves. Autumn brings harvest, a rush of labor to gather food before the frost. Winter brings hunger, long nights, bitter cold. Children die in the cold, their small bodies unable to endure. Spring brings hope, but also floods, storms, and the gnawing uncertainty of whether the new crops will grow. Every season carries both promise and threat. You would not endure a single year of it, for you are accustomed to choice, to variety, to comfort. They had none. Now let us speak of war again, for war was not a distant idea, it was a shadow over every village. When a lord called for men, peasants had no choice but to fight. You would take up a crude spear, a rusted sword, or sometimes only a farm tool, and you would march, not trained, not ready, but forced. You would face men in armor, mounted on horses, their weapons sharper, their skill greater. You would stand in lines, shoulder to shoulder, hearing the drums, hearing the war cries, and you would wait until the clash came. And when it did, there was no strategy, no order, only chaos. Swords hacked into flesh, shields splintered, men fell screaming, trampled underfoot. Blood sprayed, bones broke, mud sucked at your boots, and you fought until you either killed or were killed. And if you survived, you came home scarred, haunted, perhaps missing a limb, perhaps carrying disease. There was no glory, only trauma. Women fared no better. If your village was raided, you were not spared. Soldiers took what they wanted, and women bore the brunt of cruelty. Many were taken against their will. Many bore children conceived in violence. Many lived with shame and fear. And yet, they carried on. They raised children, they tended homes, they held families together in a world that broke them again and again. You, in your modern comfort, cannot imagine the weight of their resilience. Children were not sheltered. They were born into a world where play was rare, where death was near, where work began almost as soon as they could walk. Many died before the age of 5, claimed by fever, by hunger, by infection. Those who lived grew old before their time, faces wrinkled, bodies bent, teeth rotted, all before the age of 40. Childhood as you know it, filled with toys, laughter, school, and play, did not exist. Childhood was short, brutal, and uncertain. And let us not forget hunger, the constant companion of medieval life. Bread made of barley or rye, coarse and bitter, sometimes stretched with ground up beans or acorns when grain was scarce. Thin pottage, a soup of whatever scraps could be boiled together. Meat was rare for peasants, often reserved for feasts or stolen by the rich. Hunger gnawed at bellies, especially in winter, when stores ran low. Famine was not an exception, it was a cycle. You, who complain when dinner is delayed, would not endure the days, the weeks, when food simply did not exist. Religion, too, was heavy. Every day was measured by bells ringing from the church, every action judged by priests. You lived not only under the eye of your Lord, but under the eye of heaven. You feared hell more than death, for priests painted it vividly. Fires eternal, demons with claws, torment without end. And so you obeyed, you confessed, you fasted, you gave what little you had to the church, because to refuse was to risk your soul. Belief was not always freedom, belief was often chains. And yet, even in such darkness, humanity survived. There was laughter in taverns, where all flowed and songs rose, rough voices singing of love, of war, of sorrow. There were fairs where jugglers performed, where music filled the air, where people forgot their hunger for a brief moment. There were festivals tied to the seasons, bursts of color and joy against the gray. People married, danced, told stories, carved meaning from misery. And perhaps that is what makes their endurance most powerful, not that they suffered, but that they found ways to live in spite of it. So think again when you look back and call history boring. Think again when you imagine you would stride through medieval times with ease. You would not. You would stumble, you would cry, you would hunger, you would fall ill, you would shiver in the cold, you would tremble in the face of cruelty. You would not last a day where they lasted lifetimes.